Here's a quick talk about layers and how they work. First off, I want to establish the layers panel behaves differently in here than it does in Adobe Photoshop. Layers in Illustrator are pretty much the same as layer groups in Photoshop. Basically, the top image you see in the layers panel. By the way, you can press F7 to get it. The layers panel is something you've been working with a lot by this point, so I'm not going to go super deep into where it's at and everything, but here it is, the layers panel. Obviously, you got the eyeballs, and you've also got the locks where you can lock everything. And I wish that existed in Photoshop. That would be cool. Maybe someday it will. But the big thing to notice is that this top layer is nothing. Really, all you have is a series of sub-layers. That's one of the main points I want to point out. And whatever's selected, you'll notice that it's highlighted in blue. Now, if I want to change that, I can double-click the layer, and you'll see all these options. Template, which if you click template is basically it's a unique combination of all of these that is suggested for it. Basically, it assumes you have an image underneath, and that you want to dim it, and you want to freeze it, and you want to make it non-printable. But so if I press template, you'll see it shows everything. It gives you a preview, and it locks everything, and it turns off your printability. Turn it back off, and it goes back to normal. So it's just a combination of these. Show is obviously just showing. It's the eyeball. Preview, I'll demonstrate in a minute. Lock locks it, and print determines whether it's printable or not printable. There's a lot of times in here, like you're going to create guides or something like that, or you've got a reference. You don't want it to be able to print. So you can set the whole layer so it can't print. And also you can dim images. Any sorts of JPEGs or anything will dim. So this right here is how we make things visible. But if you, what is this? Just a second. That's funny. Go back in here. These individual layers have less options. See, you can show them, you can lock them. But up here at the very top, if you turn off the preview, you should see the outlines. So that's what preview is. What I was trying to show you, which is a keystroke that may have changed in this version, is if you control click the eyeball, in the past you could convert it to outlines by doing that. And for some reason that trick isn't working anymore, which is kind of concerning to me. All right, I just won't show you that trick. Sorry, maybe I'll cut this from the video, or maybe I'll leave it in there just for the heck of it, because you might figure it out yourself. But you should be able to. I have in the past been able to make it so you can see the outlines of just the one object by control clicking the eyeball. But yeah, they must have changed that functionality. I don't know why they take it away. Well, if you want to change the order, yes, you can just drag these around. The way I use them most commonly, this is just arranging, which we talked about already, is to press Control and the left or right bracket to bring things up or down in the layer stack. And you'll see how they change within here. By the way, when you create a group, look what happens. It actually puts it all inside of a folder. So that's what's happening here. When you ungroup, it gets rid of the folder. Again, this is not going to be super comprehensive. It's kind of what you need to know. Obviously, you might want to mess around with the size of your layer thumbnails. So you could take this up to large if you want, or even bigger. Yeah, if that's something that bothers you. Here's a common problem sometimes students give up, or the students create for themselves in this class. They'll add a layer, and let's say that the star is on that layer. I'm going to press Control F to paste it right back in the same spot. That's paste in place. And then they'll right click and they'll be like, well, I'm arranging things and I'm going to send this to the back. And it will go to the back. And they're like, well, what happened? What happened is you can only go back to the back of the layer you're on. Like this will go back. Send to the back, that'll work. Send to the front, Control right bracket, but this is never going to go to the bottom of this layer unless I drag it down to the bottom of this layer like that. So realize that, if you're doing like a face and you're doing all the midtones and the highlights and the shadows, and you've got 200 different layers, and you're like, I'm going to do the shadows on one layer, and the highlights on this layer, the midtones on this layer. Well, if you want to put a highlight behind a shadow, you're going to be in trouble. So what I suggest is put everything, just use layer groups if you want to do stuff like that. That way you never have problems. Really, I feel like the way layers work well in here is if you have a reference or you have guides, or if you, that's basically the only situation where I add an extra layer. There might be some other one I'm not thinking about, but for the most part, that's it. If you ever have a bunch of layers by mistake, sometimes I walk up to students and they've got like 15 layers, and I'm like, you don't need any of these. There's a trick to merge them. If you just go to flatten artwork, which I know in Photoshop that flattened all the layers on the one layer, made this raster image, but in here, all it does is it just puts everything on one layer. So if I had 100 different layers right now, it would have all just merged together. They would have just combined. So that's what you would have seen. So take note, whenever I select one of these guys, you'll see this little circle gets lit up, which is pretty handy. What's also kind of interesting is if you double click, you'll notice I go in that basically I see the layers inside of that one image, or that one shape, I should say. So once you go into any isolation mode, or even later on, if you go into what's called an opacity mask, for example, which I'm not going to talk about that right now, you'll see your layers change. All right, so that's the basics of layers. I know there's more to it. Like for example, like if you make a clipping mask out of this, make clipping mask, you'll notice that again, this turns into a layer group, and then here's a mask on top of everything. And if you wanted to select that mask after it lost its stroke and its fill, you would be able to, which is just go like this. You can actually get its color properties back. I thought I selected green right there. Yeah, there it goes. All right. Kind of weird the way clipping masks work, but whatever color the mask is, the initial mask, it will basically become the bottom color. No matter how many things I add in here, it's going to continue to be the bottom color here. But like for example, see that? Even though it's on top, it's still the bottom color because it's a mask. Now, if I want to, if I want to get out of this, I'll back up, select this guy, and release the clipping mask, and there we go. That's what I got. All right. That's a conversation for another day, though. I just fell into it. All right, so that's just kind of the basics of layers. Now you should know better how they work.